What's up, gang? Welcome to The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mershazde. I'm so pumped to have you here with me. Now listen, The Greatness Machine, we're about two things. Number one, people who are living their passions. And number two, those who are creating greatness in the world and doing both of these things despite the odds against them. Each episode, we're going to feature interviews with game changers, business leaders, telling us their origin stories, what made them tick, what got them to where they are now. Why? So it can help you step into your greatness within your life, your business, and your career. Occasionally, you might hear a few solo episodes from myself, moi, as I leverage my 20 years of entrepreneurship as a CEO and founder to help you grow and level up in your journey to scale your life and your business. So come be a fly on the wall, enjoy the conversation, and I'm stoked to have you here with me. Guys, welcome to this episode of The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mershazde, and boy, do we have a special guest. My man, Warren Rustand, is in the house. Warren, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Oh, glad to have you here. Do you mind if I do a little bit of housekeeping, then we'll get going on the show here?
Please do.
All right. So for listeners who are new to the show, The Greatness Machine, we're about two things. People are living their passions and those creating greatness in the world and doing so despite the odds. And Warren here is neither short of passion nor greatness. So I met Warren, this was 3 or 4 years ago. It was definitely more than 4 years ago because it was one of my first couple years at GOT, Gathering Titans. As you guys know, I talk about that all the time. And I was blown away by Warren and his story. I'm not going to lie, Warren, I was a little bit intimidated, even though you're not an intimidating guy at all, but I was a little bit intimidated to come up to you, so I didn't. And I was like, gosh, I should have went and introduced myself to him. But I think I ran up to you and told you how much I liked your talk. But Warren had an amazing talk at our event. And I was just like, I'm going to interview that guy one day. So here we are. A few years later, so glad to have you on the show. It's such an honor to get to spend time with you, and you've done so many amazing things in your life, and I'm just really proud to get to share that with our audience. If I could say one thing to the audience right now that's listening, when I think of The Greatness Machine, I think of just the premise of the show. It's people like Warren that come to mind for me. So thank you so much for coming here today.
Well, you're kind. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate that. I'm not worthy of any of them, but thank you for mentioning.
all the more reason why I said them. If you don't mind, I'd love to give a little bit of your formal biography. And then, here at The Greatness Machine, we love origin stories. Would love it if maybe you can give some of your background, how you got to where you got to. You have a really incredible story. Love to share some of that with the audience, and we can, get to some questions. Does that work for you?
That works great. Thank you.
Perfect. So for listeners who maybe have been hiding under a rock and have not been paying attention to the world, Warren is a legend in the world of YPO, EO, and all the entrepreneurial groups. As I said, we met at GOT. I'd heard many, many things about Warren before I'd actually met him. So his reputation preceded him. He did not know that I had heard all these things about him. So when I met him, I was like, wow, I've heard his name so many times from so many different people. It's really cool to actually get to hear him and his story. Currently, Warren is the CEO of Summit Capital Consulting. Just have done so much in the world of business. Chairman and director of more than 50 public, private, and nonprofit organizations, ranging in size from multi-billion-dollar companies to mid-sized, early-stage, and startups. Early in his career, he was selected as a White House Fellow. You don't know this, Warren, but I was a White House intern, so we do share a little time with POTUS together, and has written the best-selling book, The Leader Within Us. So, man, I really, I left a lot of stuff out. And even though a listener might be like, that's a lot of stuff. I'm like, guys, I left a lot of stuff out. That Warren's done a lot in his life. Would love it if you wouldn't mind if you could give us a little bit of your origin stories. How did you get to where you got to?
Well, Darius, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be on your show. You're doing such a great work and inspiring entrepreneurs all over the world. Really appreciate that and appreciate what you're doing. You've got a great audience, and I hope I'll be worthy of your audience today. Well, my story is sort of an interesting story, but I was born and raised on an isolated farm near the Canadian border in Minnesota. And we were about 3 miles from the nearest village. The nearest village was 150 people. And we went into town about once a week. And so we were just black dirt farmers. We had a few cows and pigs and goats and sheep. And that's how I grew up until I was 12 years old. We moved to Southern California and discovered a whole new world. The contrast between an isolated farm and Southern California was pretty dramatic for a 12-year-old. Yeah. So I jumped right in, and it's just surfing was just becoming something prominent at that point in time. I became a surfer, had a great time. Somebody handed me a basketball and said, if you dribble this, maybe good things will happen. So I started dribbling every day. I'm not very smart, and I just started dribbling every day. And by the time I was 18, I had a lot of offers to go to universities to play basketball. I chose the University of Arizona, went down there on a basketball scholarship, to enjoy my life and get some knowledge. And the third day I was there, I met this most beautiful co-ed in the entire world, fantastic young lady. And so I asked her out for a date, and she said no. But nobody had really ever said no to me before, so I didn't quite understand that. She said no, and so I asked her out the next week, and she said no again. And the third week, no again. I asked her out 54 consecutive weeks, and she said no every time. So on the 54th week, I knew that the guy she was dating was going home to be with his parents for their wedding anniversary, and so she was open for the week. So I'm not very smart. I thought I'd ask her again. So I asked her again, and she said no again, but I started singing and dancing and telling stories, and she finally smiled and laughed and said, okay, I'll have dinner with you. By the end of dinner, we decided that we didn't need to date anyone else again, that somehow we were going to be married. And 2 years later, we were married. And that started another part of the journey, right, which is the notion of we wanted to have babies and have a big family. And we were told 4 years into our marriage it was biologically impossible. That would never happen between us, so we were disappointed. Got ready for adoption. And lo and behold, we met a young doctor who'd worked in fertility and did some other things and helped us, put us in the hospital, checked us out, all that sort of stuff. The end result was 30 days later, she was pregnant with our first child. And every 2 years for the next 14 years, we had a baby. So we have 7 children, 6 boys and a girl. And they have 19 grandchildren between them. And the interesting part of that is that we all live together on a small farm in the middle of Tucson, Arizona. So we got a bunch of acreage, and all the kids have built houses there. So we're a 3-generation family living together, and it's really fantastic. In that process, I applied for a White House fellowship. Well, I can go back. I did dribble basketball, became an All-American, was drafted by the Golden State Warriors. Then I became the basketball coach after I played basketball for a while, assistant basketball coach at the University of Arizona while I was getting my graduate degrees. And then went off and CEO of my first business when I was 24 years old. And didn't know anything, but figured stuff out. And we had $1 million in revenue and $50,000 in net profit. And I thought I was the wealthiest guy in the entire world. So I thought I was really smart. Find out I wasn't, but that's okay. And we started another business, did that. Then I applied for a White House fellowship, which is a nationally competitive process, was one of 17 selected from several thousand applicants, and ended up supposed to work for the Vice President of the United States. But the Vice President resigned before I got there, and so I hooked up with the Secretary of Commerce, and he sent me off to Russia to negotiate the first ever executive level trade mission in American history. And went over there and did some negotiation. By the time I got back, Gerald Ford, who was Minority Leader of the House, had been nominated to be the Vice President. And I went up and knocked on his door and said, I'm your White House Fellow. And he said, what's a White House Fellow? And we became good friends. And I became a special assistant to him as Vice President, spent the last 9 months of Watergate in the White House with the Vice President. And then, of course, that fateful day when he said he knew he was going to become president. And he became president. There are a whole lot of stories around that are interesting. But he became president. I became his appointment secretary, and the rest of the time is really interesting. So we spent 3 years in the White House, which was great. And then came out and became CEO of several companies, and those companies became ever increasingly larger. Our last company was $2.5 billion in revenue, 17,000 employees, 14 countries. So we had a lot of fun along the way. We created the first ever LASIK eye surgery company in the United States, started from scratch, just a green startup, and it became the largest in the world at LASIK eye surgery. So along the way, we've had a lot of fun, just a lot of fun. I've been so lucky in my life, right? And to meet good people, to find favorable circumstances, and it's not without its failures. It's not without its difficult times. We all go through difficult times. We all go through hard times. I've never met a great leader who had an easy path. I think we all, if we're going to lead, I think there are setbacks and there are difficulties and there are challenges, and I think we've got to fight our way through that. And that's part of what your podcast is about, is this notion of greatness, right? How do you get there? Yeah. Well, the trail's uneven, and we have to do the best we can. So, gosh, big family, large family, lots of fun. It's just been a wonderful life for me, and I'm grateful to be talking with you about it.
Thank you, man. The amazing thing is you just brushed over a few publicly traded companies, a couple presidencies, and professional sports, and moving cross country in about 3 minutes. That was amazing. I have a question. I'm going to go back to just going from Minnesota to California. What part of California did you move to originally?
Well, we first started in Santa Rosa, California, and then my father decided he didn't want to settle there, so we went down, and then we rented a house in Whittier, California. We were 6 doors down from a family called the Nixon family. who the leader of which was then a member of Congress, later became president of the United States. So we knew the Nixon family from that point, and it was interesting. They were just neighbors, right? So that was fun. Yeah, so we settled in Whittier, and then ultimately spent a little time down at the beach, down at Newport Beach and Corona del Mar in that area.
Where'd you go to high school down there? I grew up in Orange County.
Okay, so I went to California High School in Whittier, California.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
And so when you started playing basketball, you said you were 12 years old? Is that correct?
Yes.
And so when did you realize, like, were you always a pretty competitive person? You know, it sounds like you're a competitive human given some of the stuff you just said.
Yeah. I like to think I'm competitive. Yes. Are there more competitive people? Certainly. But I like to compete in everything. I like to compete. And, by my senior year, I was a decent player. I was being sought after by a lot of universities who thought I could play at the college level. I didn't know if I could. And so, the big decision was between UCLA and the legendary John Wooden and the University of Arizona. It came down to those two schools, and I ultimately called John Wooden and said, I'm going to Arizona. And that was a hard call to make, because I really admired him. And I later, when I was coaching at Arizona, got to know him better. Just a great human being. I mean, just terrific leader. And but Arizona provided me the opportunity to play a lot of basketball, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to play every minute of every game if I could. So it was fun. So I don't know that I was ever good. I was okay, and I was fortunate to be nominated for some things and stuff. But it was good. It was a good chance. It was just a good experience.
Did you choose not to go to UCLA because of what you just said a moment ago, or because you're like, oh, I'm going to get more playing time at U of A?
Yeah, that's right. Because they had recruited Gail Goodrich, who became, an NBA player and was a great player. Freddie Goss, who'd set the all-time state California scoring record at Compton High School. So, and Walt Hazard, who was a great player and went on to play in the NBA. So I would be playing with that group, meant I would be sharing time at the position I played, which was point guard. And I wanted to go somewhere where I could play a lot of minutes, and because I love the game so much. And Arizona provided me the opportunity. New coach, new opportunity, new league. So it was a good opportunity for me to go there.
So you said that you had asked your wife out 54 times, and so it's a lot of rejection. Why was she rejecting you? I got to hear this.
Well, because she's really smart is why she's rejecting me. That's why. And to this day, she said, I should have rejected you for the 54th time. I mean, yeah. So we kid about that a lot. Our family and our grandchildren and children kid us a lot about it. I just thought she was special. And I think, Darius, that there are times when we meet people and we just know they're going to play a role in our lives, or they're going to influence us in some way, or they're special or unique. And I just had that feeling from the very first time I met her that she was a remarkable woman. And it proved to be absolutely true. She is stunning. She's a remarkable, smart, talented, gifted woman who has tried to keep me on track, right? And I'm just glad to have been trained by her. And I came from a family that was just a little bit off dead center. Maybe you know families like that aren't quite the all-American family. And we had some challenges, and she came from a great family. And so I got to see what a really good family was like. And that's what I wanted to have, was a really good family. And so we've worked really hard at being good parents and being good to each other and trying to do the right things. Haven't always done it, have failed to along the way, but she's been really special for me.
That's amazing. Yeah. How long have you guys been married for again?
July 11th will be 60 years.
Wow. That's awesome. That's amazing.
And she once said, I introduced her one time. She was speaking, and I said, soon it'll be 60 years we will have been married. And she got up there and said, 10 of the best years I've ever had.
So you've been married for 60, it'll be 60 years, but so it sounds like you guys have been together for what, is that 2 years on top of that? So 59 years?
Yeah, we dated for 2 years prior to getting married. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's amazing. I always feel like I'm bragging when I'm like, oh, I've been with my wife. I met my wife 22 years ago in August, but there's nothing compared to Warren over here. I'm like an amateur.
Well, old age helps a little bit, right? Living a long time helps.
No, it's funny though. I felt the same way when I met my wife. I was like, man, this person's like, my wife rejected me like for 2 years. It was brutal, but she said her logic was pretty interesting. She's like, well, if he could deal with the worst of me before, early on, then and she just put me through the ringer, and she literally says this to everyone. She's like, I just made him deal with as much of the worst of me that he could deal with, and I just wanted to see how he'd react, and if he was willing to put up with it, then I show them my good side. And I'm like, that's a really backwards way of approaching it, but you were smart. It worked.
That's right. The problem is that the problem is they're both smarter than we are. I think that's the key for
So, so when you got out of basketball, did you get into business first? I wasn't clear there. Business and then the White House, or White House then the business?
No, what I did was after I left basketball, playing basketball, the coach that I played for in college hired me as his assistant. So I used that as a vehicle to go back to graduate school. And I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I went to law school for a very brief period of time and decided I just wasn't going to be a lawyer. This is not something I wanted to do. So I went to graduate school in political science and got my graduate degrees, and then coached for a couple of years. And I enjoyed the coaching, but I really always wanted to be in business. My dad was an entrepreneur. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. His father was an entrepreneur. So I came from a line of entrepreneurs, and I had a sense of what it was all about. So I had a chance to start a company when I was 24 years old, and it was a financial services company. I really didn't know anything about it, but I had some decent people around me, and we made it work, and were able to exit the company pretty early. Then use those proceeds to do another company. We're able to exit that pretty quickly. Then that's when I applied for the White House Fellowship. I just thought it might be an opportunity to learn something more, right? To go on a bigger scale and try to learn something. Plus, you go back to the competition thing. I wanted to see how I could compete with other people my age for something like that. And I'd wanted to be a Rhodes Scholar out of college, but Carson and I, my wife and I, decided to get married at the summer of our junior year, and you couldn't be in those days. You couldn't be a Rhodes Scholar and be married, and so I had to withdraw from the competition. And so the White House Fellowship is really the U.S. version of the Rhodes Scholarship, and it's where 20 or fewer people are selected each year to go to Washington D.C. They're selected because of their successful careers and background. They're not interns. They go there. They get paid at the highest federal government wage level. And they are plugged into the president, the vice president, or a cabinet secretary, and they're expected to make a contribution day one. So you're with that principal all the time. So it's really interesting.
Did you say you worked for the office of the vice president? Is that correct?
I worked for the office of the vice president when Gerald Ford was vice president, and then he became president, and it was one of those really interesting times. Did you work in the OEOB, or did you work in West Wing? Where's the office? I had an office in the West Wing right outside the Oval Office. There was an old clothes closet there, and it was room enough for a desk and a telephone. And my job was to shepherd people in and out of the White House or the Oval Office, right? Then to process all the paperwork, everything else going on. And that finally got to be too cumbersome. So I actually got another office over in the old executive office building. And so I was in the EOB overlooking the West Wing.
And so how long were you in the White House for in total?
Well, total about, including the vice presidential time, presidential time, about 3.5 years.
And so, having spent time there and then commercially going back into the business world, what was like the big learning that you had there? What was your biggest takeaway where you're like, oh, this is, and having now time to look back and say, oh, I was able to take this, and this and interweave that into like commercial success. How would you explain that?
Well, having been there yourself, you have a sense of what it's like to go to work in that environment every day. It's an adrenaline rush. I mean, it's really because the biggest issues in the world are in the White House, right?
Right.
And the president gets to deal with them. And so every day you're stimulated. But in answer to your question, what did I take away? I took away the notion that the world is just so much bigger than I thought it was. It's so much more complex. It's challenging, right? As we look at the globe, we look at all the countries, the populations, the ethnicities, the religions, the cultures. It's an amazing place. And when you're in the White House, you get to learn about and play in that space, the entire globe. And I think that's thing I took away. I'm a farm kid, right? I'm just an average farm kid, and I had the chance to, at 29 years old, to be engaged directly with the President of the United States and all the people that surround him in a way that was unimaginable to me younger in my life. And so I took away this notion that it's just a really remarkable place to be. And the issues that we dealt with there, as it was for you, are profound and significant. There are no easy issues, right? The easy things are done by other people. The biggest things in the world come to the President of the United States. And he's got to make tough choices. I have such admiration for anybody who serves in that role. and people who work in the White House, because it's very difficult. It's very challenging. So I took that away. Secondly, I took away relationships that were just amazing. Maybe could I drop some names for you just to try to impress you? Would that be all right,
Yeah,
Gary?
please.
So,
I love being impressed. Yes, please.
so the people that I got to hang out with every day, Dick Cheney, Don Rumsfeld, Henry Kissinger, George H.W. Bush, Bob Gates, Brent Scowcroft. That was the senior team. That's the team I was a part of in the White House. I mean, they were all exceptional people who, for the next 40 years, went on to lead prominent lives and affect policy in the White House and policy for the United States government. So I had a really interesting group of people, and they became friends. And so for my business career, many of them helped during that time. And some of them, whether they became investors or they sent me to somebody who could help me raise capital or whatever it was, or gave me information that was helpful to us, all those relationships paid off, right? So I was just very fortunate.
Yeah, it sounds like it. That's amazing. I'm gonna give you a little tidbit of information about myself, because I've just gotten into private equity, and I did it in a really interesting way. I spent 23 years in mortgage lending and servicing, and I built a very large. It was actually a government FHA, VA, and USDA servicing platform. So right now that servicing platform services about $100 billion dollars worth of loans. When I was CEO, we grew it to about 30-ish, and then it grew. The first 30 is the hardest. Just to give myself a pat on the back. When you go from 0 to 30, that's way harder than 30 to 100. But yeah, I wanted to get out of that industry. I didn't like the industry very much. Look, it's a great industry. It helps people get into homes, which is, I think, one of the fabrics of democracy is home ownership. And it's one of the important, I think it's a really important thing for society. But the industry itself it's a very hard industry because it's cyclical and it's very volatile because of interest rate movement. So it's hard to build enterprise value. So I decided I want to get into private equity, and I ended up partnering with a gentleman who's now my business partner, who was a former partner at Goldman Sachs in the wealth management world. And he built one of the largest wealth management firms in the United States, sold it to Goldman, and then ran their PFM, their private financial management business there for 4 years. And so he left that, and we ended up partnering. I convinced him, kind of like the way you convinced your wife. He rejected me at first, but we raised $250 million just recently, and we're out there trying to help that part of the world. But he said something to me. I want to give you that context because he said something to me yesterday or the day before. I was in Southern California visiting him. And he said, in business, that the quality of your conversations is what really justifies the quality of your I'm butchering it right now because I'm bad at remembering what other people say, but it was essentially the quality of your conversations justifies like the value that the world perceives you to be. So when we talk about the president of the United States, the quality of those conversations are really, really high, hence the power that comes with it. In business, CEOs get paid a lot because of the quality of the conversations they have, and as opposed to maybe folks that don't make as much money. That's commercially how in politics you get power, and in business you get money, or you get power and money. I wanted to kind of hear your thoughts around having been in the world of politics and been around probably the most impactful conversations of the time that you were there, and how that parlayed into your business world.
Yeah, I think it raised my eyesight, right? I think the power of the conversations, the quality of the conversations, raised my eyesight as to what was possible. It took off limitations. We talk a lot among ourselves in YPO about self-limiting beliefs. And as a farm kid, my view was not expansive. I could see to the barn. I could take care of the horses and the cows. I could see a field out in the distance that needed to be plowed or harvested, right? But that was my view. The bigger view was when, once a week we drove into a small village of 150 people, but that was my world and my view. And sometimes we get trapped by our world view, and we get narrowed by that. We need to get to the mountaintop to be able to see the expanse that lies before us and the opportunities, therefore, that are ours. All of the world that we can see is our opportunity. And so my time in the White House increased the expanse of my world, so I could see what's possible. And so as a result of that, I no longer saw just the barn, but I saw in the distance the opportunity to build something significant that affected people's lives. My purpose, which I decided 50 years ago, was to improve the human condition wherever I find it. And so therefore, it led me corporately to be involved in organizations which affect people's lives and to improve their lives. LASIK eye surgery, the largest mental health company in the world, right? The physical health, healthcare in all types. So those kinds of things, which did a lot for other people. There were other kinds of companies along the way as well, but we always stayed true to our purpose. And so I think this notion of increasing our vision. So there are three principles that I believe are fundamental to being successful and trying to be great. The first is clarity of vision. I think we have to know where we're going. And I think without that, the world is murky and vague, and we make a lot of mistakes. Clarity of vision. The great people I've had a chance to know, Darius, all know where they're going. Second, certainty of intent. Intentionally acting on that vision. We have to be certain that we will act on the vision that we have, so that as we have that vision, the great expanse, right, we then act on that every day to get us there. Mm-hmm. The third principle is the power of values. That's who we are on the journey to our vision. It's how we treat other people. It's how we treat ourselves, right? It's this notion of, and we're not perfect at that. Man, I've made lots of mistakes along the way.
Sure.
And I've hurt people's feelings, not trying to, I just probably have. I've done stupid things, but along the way, we get better and better at what we're trying to do. And we refine ourselves based on our vision. And we are capable of achieving the most unbelievable visions if we just put ourselves to it. And so so your question is a good one, and that is sort of, what did I learn? Well, I learned that the world is big and expansive, and we can play in the world. We're all capable of doing that. We have to have a clear vision of where we're going, that clarity of vision. We have to have a plan to act on that vision, and then we have to treat ourselves and others really well along the way. If we do that, I think we can have a pretty good life.
I love that. God, I have so many questions. I'm going to give you my comments, and I'm going to ask you a question. Please. So I was always a person in that was running pretty hard on the hedonic treadmill up until probably about, I don't know, 18 months ago. And then I just realized, I always set these really, really big goals, and then I would grind to go get them. And then I get there and I would just kind of move the bar, the goalpost would move. And I had done that over and over and over again. And I didn't really feel that satisfied by it. And I also felt like it just wasn't very fun. And then I kind of had a moment. I had a spiritual moment that happened to me that it's a story for probably not the show right now, but I've talked a little bit about it on the show, but it's a long story. And it was a spiritual thing that happened where it was like kind of a God moment. It happened out of the blue anyway, without going into details, I had this moment where I said, I've been grinding my ass off. I was 40, I'm 45 now. So I was 44 when this happened. I was like, I've been grinding. I keep moving the goalposts, not happy. It's like hitting the goals doesn't seem to and a lot of times I don't hit the goals and I'm beating myself up because I'm not hitting the goals. I've done it go a different way. What if I'm and I kind of just surrendered to a higher power. I said, I'm just going to surrender to a higher power. And it's not on me. I'm going to have visions, but I'm going to be more focused on how I show up in the world. Who am I trying to be? Right. And what's important to me, to your point, intent. And I got really intentional around intent of what is important to me and how do I want to honor those things daily. And for me, it came down to three things: creating impact in the world, building deep relationships, and being healthy, living. And I kind of broke that into three subcategories, which was building a private equity business, podcasting, because I like doing this, and helping entrepreneurs on the impact side. On the deep relationships was my direct family. How am I honoring that daily? My longer term friends. And then here, I live in Austin, Texas, and I've only lived here for a few years. And I said, I want to build deep relationships here in Austin. So I'm I've always, kind of paying into those tills. And then on the health, it was the obvious stuff: body, mind, and spirit. And so I said, I'm going to quit focusing on the longer term goals. Maybe I'll set them, but it's I'm not just looking at those and looking at those. I'm actually just going to look at these 9 areas and just pay into those constantly. And if I'm not focused on those 9 areas, and sometimes, to your point, I fall short, and that those are underpinned by my values, my core values. But the minute I did that, I don't know, things just got a lot easier. I like, and a lot of, and frankly, even this thing I just said a moment ago, raising the $250 million, like that happened just like, that wasn't my goal. My goal was actually a lower number. I exceeded my goal on that. And I was like, oh, well, that's great. But I'd love to get your feedback on that, because that's something that I've gotten settled on here in the last probably 18 months or so. And I was like, and it's just changed things. And I just would love to hear your thoughts as you just talked about the way you approach life. And I kind of feel like I'm saying the same thing you said, but in my own words. What are your thoughts when I say what just happened to me?
Well, first of all, I appreciate that. And most of all, I respect you for the submission to the higher purpose. I talk a lot when I speak about the higher calling and the higher purpose that we have in our lives, and that our whole life is about discovering that. Some discover that very early in life, some discover it very late in life. But the notion of submitting to a higher power, I believe there are forces in the universe at work on us all the time, and that we need to pay attention and listen to those forces. And when we get quiet and listen, we can be influenced in significant ways. And sometimes we just are too busy to listen. I have some mountain climbing friends, and they like to scale mountains like Mount Everest and places like that, right? And I said, how do you know when to climb? And they said, the mountain tells you when to climb. Listen to the mountain. Listen to the mountain, and you'll know when to ascend to the top. And I find that masterful, right? If we all listened more and talked less, if we had quiet time. So as a matter of my scheduling, one of the things I really learned at the White House, because I controlled the president's schedule, I learned how important time was. I just used time before that. After that, I mastered time. So every morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, as soon as we're done with this podcast, and at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I close my door, shut off my computer, shut off my cell phone, and I spend it in quiet, thinking great thoughts, thinking about where I'm going, thinking how I might get there, thinking who I need to influence and help along the way. So those notion of being quiet and listening to the world and listening to those still small voices that come into our mind that influence us in positive ways. And I believe the world is working for us, not against us. I believe that people are inherently good, not bad. And I think we need to get out there and use our capacities to influence the world in positive ways. And everybody knows the world needs it right now. We're struggling through some tough times. But this notion is that we as an individual, part of our greatness is understanding our own capacity to do good and to what's right. And when we understand that capacity, we will achieve at heights we can't imagine. We will do things that a short time ago was not something we could fathom. And so I think we have such great opportunities. I think the world is awash with opportunity. And I think you, through your process, have discovered some of that. Sometime we ought to do a show just on that, right? Just on that notion of being influenced in the way we've been influenced, right? But part of that is our willingness to submit, right? And that's really an important issue, is our willingness to step back, get our egos out of the way, get all the stuff that's going on in the world out of our system, all the voices that are yelling at us all the time, right? And just be quiet and listen really carefully. And when we do that, great things happen.
I love that. I have a friend, he's a guy I met through EO, he's probably one of the more successful people I know. He's based out of Phoenix, Arizona, real estate guy, financially successful people. I think I should qualify. He's a great human. I love him. But he's a person, especially real estate is like, it's pretty like dog eat dog, right? And he came up, self-made, and he said something to me once, and I want to get your thoughts on this, just having, been around a lot of powerful people. You yourself are a powerful person. He said, power is taken, it's not given. And I struggle with it a little bit, honestly, because I'm a person that's a pretty equitable person. So like, I'm not a person that grabs from others. I feel like that there's a bit of a zero sum mentality with that. When I see people act that way, it feels like I feel like the world's abundant and we don't need to like grab from others in order to gain. But I've seen it served him well, at least from a financial perspective. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, how do you feel about that statement, or what's your perspective on that?
Well, I think I understand the statement, and the notion that power is taken, not given, right? This notion is that people determine their own greatness. Nobody determines it. You have to think back to Jim Collins in the book Good to Great. He said, leadership is not a matter of circumstance. It's a matter of choice and discipline. We choose to be great or not. Nobody gives it to us. Nobody gives us greatness. Nobody awarded Michael Jordan greatness, or LeBron James, or Steph Curry, if you're thinking of the NBA, right? Or Tiger Woods in golf. Or it's not given, right? It is assumed through discipline and choice. And the people that I know that have risen to great heights, that we would define as in a broad category great, have decided to be great. And then they've disciplined themselves to be great. And I think the quality that most people are missing is discipline. I think lots of people want to be great. Lots of people have an opportunity to be great. But very few people have the capacity for disciplining themselves to be great. Right? And so I think we have to be very thoughtful about that, it's not a circumstance. It's not a gift. It's not given. And so when you think about the comment that you just made, the power is taken. Greatness is decided, right, by the individual who determines greatness. We determine that in our own mind. And so each of us, given our capacities, and we're given very different capacities, each of us are given capacities, we can rise to greatness with the capacity that we have, right? And I think that's really important. A quote that I created a while ago was, success is relevant only when measured against one's own potential. So my success is only relevant to my potential. It doesn't matter what you do, Darius. It doesn't matter what your friend in Phoenix does. I don't have to compare myself to anyone. I compare myself to my potential and what I've done with that potential. That determines my individual greatness. So it's not in the world's eyes that we're great. It's in our own eyes that we're great. Have we achieved all that we can achieve with the gifts and capacities we've been given? If we do, we will lead a very good life. If we don't, we'll always be frustrated.
And so when, and I guess there's a choice there around like I have a do you know Rand Stagen? Are you friends with him?
I know the name.
He has a Stagen Leadership Institute out of Dallas.
Yep.
I did that program. He has a quote that's like, with awareness comes choice, and that I love. And so what I found with myself is when I haven't felt like I was in like living up to at least my potential, I think I like that framing of it in that way. I felt the most frustrated there. And a lot of times it was just because I felt like I was not in the right environment, right? Or I didn't feel like I was like getting good leverage for my talents, because I feel like, and maybe this is just a thought for folks that feel like, hey, I am disciplined. I show up, I do the work. I'm a learner, but I'm not where I want to be. And so, at least in my experience, when that's happened, it's happened a couple times in my life, because I feel like I do feel like I'm a very disciplined person, and I do feel like I'm willing to put in the work, and I don't feel like I have limiting beliefs or anything like that. But I find myself at times I'll get frustrated when I'm not getting the results I'm looking for. This is also why I kind of reframed things the way I did, 18 months ago to you. For me, it's a lot of times it's, am I in the right? There's an idea that, have you ever listened to Naval Ravikant? Are you familiar with his work? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like Naval's stuff. He talks about proximity. And so for me, I felt like I was in the wrong proximity. I was in the wrong location. I was in the wrong environment, and I wasn't getting the leverage for the work. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think sometimes, it's a really good point. I think sometimes we work our tails off. We are disciplined. We do everything necessary. But the choice we've made and the space we're in is the wrong choice. Okay, so it's choice and discipline. We have to make good choices about where we are and add discipline to that, and then we can achieve greatness. But if we're in the wrong space, right, we can be as disciplined as we want to be. We will be frustrated. We will not achieve that which we want to achieve, right, because we're in the wrong space. We've got to find the right space for our lives, whether that's in business or in family, right, or with friends in the community, however we're looking at it. We just have to get in the right space. And then we have to have the discipline in that space to achieve what it is we want to achieve. And so I currently mentor 43 CEOs. And I speak with them every other week to once a month, right? And we talk about the really serious stuff. The business stuff kind of works its way through and so forth. But the really serious stuff about their potential and where they are and the space they're in. and how do they achieve greatness and how do they get there? And we speak a lot about that on their individual basis. And I think so many of them have changed spaces as a result of that.
Interesting.
And gone on to have remarkable success. But they were just it's like getting in the lake, right? And you're in the wrong lake, right? You can swim like crazy. You can be a really good swimmer, but you got to get in the right lake. And it's finding the right space is really critical.
So when you say they've changed spaces, do you mean like industries or companies or all of the above? Like, give me some examples.
All of the above. They could, if it's a business issue, they could be in the wrong place. For example, I was helping one person. I was mentoring him. I'd been mentoring him about a year, and I noticed that he wasn't always responsive to my questions. There was a lag time and so forth. And so I became concerned about that. And so finally, I just asked him, do you have an alcohol problem? He said, yes. I said, let's talk about it. Well, clearly he was an alcoholic, high functioning alcoholic. And so we began to talk about space and changing space. And he was resistant. But I said, would you give up alcohol for a week? He said, yes. And at the end of the week, I said, would you do it a second week? Yes. Well, he's been now sober 3.5 years.
Wow.
And he's had a 10X on everything in his life. Everything in his life. So he was in the wrong space doing the wrong thing. Right? And once we got him out of that space, he could now clearly see he's gone to his management teams, his clients, and acknowledged that he's an alcoholic. Told them why, and told them where he is today. And what's happened is they have great respect for him. They have doubled down on doing business with him, for example, doubled down on their loyalty and commitment as management team, right? He's probably saved his marriage and his relationship with his 3 children as a result of that. And it's just amazing what happens when we get clarity of vision. Clarity of vision. We have to have that, right? And vision for him was opaque. It was murky, right? Because he was in the cloud of alcohol all the time. At work, at home, all the time. Once he got out of that space, then he was able to see clearly. And what he saw clearly was what he wanted. And what he wanted was now what he has. He's become a competitive cyclist. He's lost 35 pounds. He's the healthiest he's ever been. His marriage is spectacular. His relationship to his kids is off the charts. His business is 10X what it was in 3 years. Because he got in the right space. He got in the right place for him to achieve. He recognized the potential of his own capacity, right? And that's how he defined success. He was always comparing himself to everybody else. By the way, he grew up as a concert pianist. He's one of the best pianists in the world.
Wow.
And he gave that up, right? He gave that up because he was just bored and fatigued. He was in the wrong space. He was never intended to be that. He was being a concert pianist because his dad wanted him to be a concert pianist, not because he ever wanted to be.
Wow.
So I think we sometimes limit ourselves. We sometimes get in the wrong place, and we still want to be great, but we can't because of where we are. And so we have to move ourselves to someplace else. And when we do that, it opens up the doors to huge opportunities. And I think that's why we need quiet time. That's why we need, sometimes I'll just go jump in the car, middle of the day, and I'll go driving. I happen to like to drive, number one. And number two is I think really well when I'm in the car.
Yeah.
Or I'll go sit in the mountaintop. We're 5 miles from the mountains here. I'll go sit on the edge of a mountain and just think. Or I'll get in the boat and go turn off the engines in the middle of the lake and just sit there and think. And it's amazing what comes to us and what clarity we can have if we'll spend the time to get it.
I love that. That's a great story. So we got about 13 minutes. You good for 13 more minutes?
I'll go as long as you want to go.
All right. I might run over 13 minutes. When you left the White House, you got in, obviously you've had a ton of commercial success, have built some huge, multi-billion-dollar companies. It's a really, can you tell us a little bit about doing that? And the other thing I'd love to hear about this, which is something that I'm struggling with a little bit right now, going into a new industry. And I'm sure maybe folks that go into, midlife, they decide to make a next chapter change in their life. They go into a new part of the second mountain they start climbing. They're going into new parts of the world, new industries. There's a little bit of how do you do that successfully while being able to still practice at the top of your license? Because it looks like you did that. You did it in so many different industries. And what I've found is there's folks out there that kind of will discount because you don't have industry experience. And I'm like, if you run one company, you run them all. You're getting humans to show up and do great work. Like, that's the hard part, as far as I'm concerned. The product's that's a widget. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on how did you make that leap yourself, and how do you do it in so many different industries without, overcoming the things I'm talking about.
Well, I have to move from industry to industry because I don't know very much, right? So I'm about an inch deep. When you're not very smart, you're a farm kid, right? I'm not very smart, so I have to keep moving before people figure it out.
Yeah.
So we move from industry to industry. So there are two schools of thought. One is deep industry knowledge makes for success, for leadership, right? And I can subscribe to that, and I've seen that happen. No question about that. The second piece is that it's all about leadership, and that you can lead anything, anywhere. If you have the ingredients for leadership, you can lead. If you're a leader, it's natural, right? And so there are two schools of thought about that, and they're both correct, right? Not one is wrong. They're both correct, and they've been proven correct over hundreds of years in business, right? There are people who are just great leaders. Dick Cheney, who had been a very successful Secretary of Defense, after he left Defense, became CEO of a Halliburton, Texas-based company. And he'd never been in the business world. He'd been in the public sector his whole life. Never been in business. But he doubled that business in 24 months.
Wow.
Doubled Halliburton's size in 24 months, right? So what caused it? Why? Because he's a really strong leader, right? Don Rumsfeld, who was Secretary of Defense, former congressman, really interesting guy. He went to General Instruments when General Instruments was in real trouble. He completely revolutionized and reordered General Instruments and brought it to new success, great success, right? But he'd never spent much time in the private sector. So I'm not so sure that deep industry knowledge in every case is necessary. Do I think it can be great and helpful? Absolutely. Can it be the deciding ingredient? Certainly it can in some cases. In the same way that leadership can be the difference. People who lead people have a profound impact on organizations. And I think that there are people who simply are great leaders, and they can lead almost any organization. They could lead in the military, they could lead wherever they are recognized by their peers almost immediately as the leader in the room. And the way they lead influences and impacts and maximizes the efforts of people, right? And so I think that those two things are not contrary, right? They're not opposed to each other. I think they can both be true, and I think it's just the case of where you are. So what I've learned along the way is that leading people is really important. I started leading people in high school, in student government, at the university, in student government, in sports, being captain of every team I've ever been on. It's always about leadership for me, and learning leadership and thinking about leadership, and then executing that in a way that brings other people along with you. And so, the world has changed. COVID's changed the world a lot. I speak now about the pre-COVID world and the post-COVID world.
Right.
I think leadership has changed. I think we used to think IQ was the deciding factor in leadership, right? We just had to be smarter. I'm evidence that that's not true, by the way. But I think that, but post-COVID, it's EQ. It's emotional intelligence that's the most important ingredient for leadership, right? It's understanding people. It's interacting with people. It's understanding the ability to be empathetic, sympathetic, compassionate is more important than just being the smartest person in the room. And IQ is now second. SQ, social intelligence, is third, right? And AQ, adaptability, is fourth. So we've reordered things a bit. And I think we're seeing a new world order in terms of leadership and the leadership skills and capacities that are necessary. So I hope I've answered your question. I don't think you have to have one or the other. It can be either one. They can both be successful. And Darius, for you, you might just be the great leader. And it doesn't matter whether you're in private equity or you're in real estate or you're building an optical company. It doesn't matter, right? Because leadership is the quintessential difference for organizations. Great organizations generally have great leadership.
Right.
And it doesn't matter whether they have industry experience or not. They can learn what they need to know. So it's just a view that I have. It's not necessarily the right view or a correct view. It's just a view. And I like to listen to other views as well.
Yeah, I think I carry the same view. I find that not everyone has the view, and so it's when have you been confronted where folks don't have the same view, and how have you overcome that, or has that just been something where you just overcome it through great leadership, and over time they kind of figure out that, wow, Maybe he doesn't know the industry, but he's good at getting people around him that do. Like, what's our workaround for that? Because that's how I've done it.
The
But I'm
workaround
curious.
for us is, Darius, is as we go to acquire companies or get controlling interest in companies, we always bring somebody who has that deep knowledge with us.
Right.
We always have an expert right next to us, so we can have that information and that talent. Right. We think that's really important. So if we're doing something in technology, I don't know anything about technology. If we're doing something in AI, I better have somebody who knows AI with me. Right. If we're doing something in like LASIK eye surgery, better have an ophthalmologist or an optometrist or both sitting there helping us. So I think expertise is always available, and we can hire that and we can utilize that and we can have that as a part of our leadership. It doesn't necessarily have to be the leader of the company that has that.
And so do you see that the leader's job is to find the talent? Is that really
Yes.
your position on it? Okay.
I mean, you only have to talk to me for 5 minutes to know that I have to have a lot of talent around me. So if I'm the smartest guy in the room, Darius, we're really in trouble. Okay. Yeah. So this notion is that we always try to put together management teams and leadership teams that are extraordinary and remarkable, and then incent them like crazy to be successful, right? Because all of us are going to win as a result of that, right? So it's this notion that I think we have to always be willing to surround ourselves with smarter people, better people, because they help us become better leaders in the process. And we can't be scared or fearful of having really smart people around us, right? We just have to have good people around us. In the same way, we have to have people with high values around us to keep us on the straight and narrow path, right? We have to have others who have industry knowledge. We have to have others who have other specific knowledge. Maybe that's finance, marketing, sales, whatever it might be. They have to be experts in their space. And the better the teams we put together, the better the opportunity for all of us to be successful.
When you've done deals in the past, and assuming, let's say, you have the right team that you've put together, and it sounds like you guys did like with controlling stakes, where you took control of the business. Is that correct?
Yes.
Have you had a situation where maybe you didn't have the right leader who was running the business? Have you had that happen in any of your deals where you put together the team, it's the wrong president, wrong CEO, you don't know it out of the gate, and has that happened to you? And if so, like how did you work through it?
Yeah, it happened a couple of times early on, and we decided to do a workaround, because that's always difficult and uncomfortable, because ultimately you have to replace that person, and that's always a challenge, and it slows down success. So the formula that we use is different, and that is that when we decide that we want to buy a controlling interest in a company, we will then hire my successor. I'll always go in as CEO for maybe 6 months or a year. We want to get the culture right. We want to get the strategy right and so forth. And then I'll evolve to chairman of the board. But we bring the person who's going to be my successor in day one. That person is there. We acknowledge to everybody in the business, this person is going to be the leader of this company. So they come in with that position, that respect, right, and that intention. And then they are with us as we, meaning our team, they are with us as we create the culture, as we create the strategic plan for the business, as we create the vision, right, if you will, the values, the intent, all of that. And so there's no need to hire somebody later who wants to come in and change everything, or who has different ideas from what we have, right? And so it's a seamless succession that we try to create, and it's worked really well for us. And I would, listeners might think about that as a way of processing succession, right? And that is to bring the person in early and to give them an opportunity to be part of the building of the business itself, and then become the CEO of the business.
So in your experience, when you think of, I love this quote. I did a podcast on Fridays. I do solo podcasts where it's always these like profound learnings. I read a lot, and obviously
I've listened to it. It's good.
Thank you. I always tell people, I'm like, if I do a solo, it means it really meant a lot to me, or else I won't put it out there.
Right.
And so they're not very long, like 10, 15 minutes, but they're my profound learnings that I write them down as I learn them, and then go back into the shows. But I see how that, because there's a quote which is like, success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan. And so I find that a lot of people will talk about their successes, and which are interesting and they're nice. I'm way bigger fan of the failures, because I think that's where all the learning happens, right?
Yeah.
When you start to think of, in your life, in your business of doing deals, what's like the biggest failure that you had where you're like, oh, that really took me to the next level as far as learning?
I was a partner with two other people in a good business, successful business, and we had to leverage everything to get into it, right? And we do that as young entrepreneurs. We tend to personal guarantees everything, right? And so we were in a deal like that, and we were building the company. Unbeknownst to me, my two partners had also hypothecated or pledged stock and other things in another deal they were doing, separate and apart from me, and that deal failed. Well, now they owed a lot of money, and everything came due. Both their other company and our company came due, and so all of a sudden, I'm looking down the barrel of owing the banks $44 million.
Oh, wow.
At the time, I didn't have $44 million. Just didn't have it. And and those guys filed bankruptcy and kind of went on their way and started over. But I had all, because of the personal guarantees and stuff, I had to resolve the $44 million. And so for 2 years, I got up and got dressed and went to my office, and every day it was hand-to-hand combat with banks and lawyers and accountants and tax people, and it went on for 2 years. And that's all I did for 2 years, fought the battle. And in the end, we prevailed, and it worked out okay. It was just fine. But I never told my wife about it, and I never told our children about it.
Oh, my gosh.
Because I was 7 children. She had her hands full. She was very involved in the community. She was doing lots of things. There was nothing she could do that would help me through this process, right? And I didn't want to worry her with it. And so I just fought the battle alone. And I look back on that time, and the lesson I've learned was I needed to share that.
Oh, okay.
I needed to share that, because owning that was really difficult. Just owning it by myself with no help was really difficult. And I learned a lot. And what I learned to do was to be more vulnerable, to be more open, to be more sharing, to bring other people into my world in a way that they could support me, help me. Maybe they couldn't do a single thing about it, but they could say, hey, go Warren, you can do this, cheer me up, whatever it was. And I didn't have that for that period of time. And as a result of that, I learned that was an important consideration for me. And I needed to share that time. I've had other failures, both personally and politically and corporately. I mean, golly, leadership is about failing and getting back up and failing and getting back up. I mean, that's what we do. And I've done that. And I've, done stupid things, and I've learned from each one. I think you're right. Failure is a great gift to us. It's a great gift, and we need to appreciate it. Rather than just getting in the mud and feeling sorry for ourselves, just step back again, quiet time. What did I learn here? What can I apply to my future? What's going to make me better, stronger, smarter in the future? As a result of my failure, what's going to happen? And I failed a lot. I'd be the first to say that I failed a lot.
I appreciate you sharing that. I had a similar situation happen to me, but I was I was a nervous wreck. I told my wife out of the gate. She saw me have a meltdown. I'm like, I couldn't. I'm like, I'm like, she could tell by my face. I can't hide stuff. So it's it was terrible though. It lasted about a year, and I learned a lot from it though. But
Darius, there's a quote that I really like that has helped me in that process and maybe speaks to this issue. Is by Gandhi. And Gandhi said, the genius of man is not that they can remake the world. The genius of man is that we can remake ourselves. And failure allows us to remake ourselves. Failure allows us to change ourselves, to get better. And I've had to change a lot. I hope I'm a better person than I was 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. I just hope I'm a better person. I hope that my failures have made me a better person.
Yeah, well, clearly they have. Gosh, I want to be respectful of your time. We are actually at time, but I want to be respectful of your time. Do you mind running for a couple more minutes?
I'm good if you are.
Yeah, let's do that. I want to ask one more question, and then I'd love to get to the greatness question. Gosh, I could talk to you for like 3 hours. This is too fun. So most people don't know this on the show, but a lot of my number one reason for asking people on the show is I'm like, I just want to hang out with someone that I want to meet and learn from them. And you do know him. He was in GOT with us. Bob. I can't forget Bob's last name. I'll remember it in a second.
Bob Glazier?
Yeah, Bob Glazier. Yeah, you know Bob, right?
I do.
Yeah. So I can't believe I first forgot Bob's last name, but Bob and I were talking because he does a podcast, and he's like, I just figure it's the 1 hour I get to spend with this amazing human, so that's how he, and I'm like, I never thought of it that way, but like, he's right. That's why I love doing this show. I get to spend an hour with an amazing human, and maybe there's more to come from it, but at least I know I got that hour under my belt. But so first of all, I just want to thank you, man. This has been really, really, really enlightening, and you're selfishly you're helping me through some stuff I'm going through right now. So I appreciate it.
Well, you're very kind to invite me to have a conversation with you. And anytime you want to have a conversation, just dial me up, send me a text. I love the way you ask questions. I love your interest. You have a really, really good way of leading this podcast, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. I practice makes perfect. This is like my almost 300 show. So I had this question early in the show, but I kind of put it to the side, and I thought I'd ask it now before we get to the greatness question. You've had a few years on this earth. You've seen a lot. You've done a lot. I think right now, it's a pretty complicated time. I mean, not to say that it wasn't complicated before, but I have a lot of friends who are similar in age to you, and I've asked them this question, which is, do you think that the world's in a worse place now than it's been in the past? And if so, how do you think we can? What are your thoughts on how we can improve it? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been asked that before, and my answer is no. Because do we recall that the Civil War, when families were fighting families, brothers against brothers, when 800,000 Americans died? It's just an amazing thing. So the Civil War, and what about the the Vietnam War? And people marching in the streets, people getting caught. The National Guard killed 4 Kent State University students on the campus at Kent State. The 1968 Chicago Democratic Convention, it was looting, fires, people being injured, killed. What about the civil rights marches and the civil rights movement in this country, right? What about the 6-year period of time where 4 American leaders were assassinated, right? Bobby Kennedy, John Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, all killed, assassinated. So I think have we been through tougher times? Yeah, I think we've been through tougher times. This is a political morass more than anything else, and I think we'll have an opportunity to right the ship. I think in the end, we'll make good choices. I have a strong belief in people, and I think in the end, when confronted with good or bad, I think people choose good, and I think people will figure it out. And so I have enduring faith in people. My goal is to opt out for humanity. What's best for humanity? Let's make choices around what's best for people, best for humanity. And I think we do that, we're going to be okay. So my answer would be no, I don't think so. I think there have been other really difficult times in this country, particularly the United States, but around the world as well. And I think we work our way through these difficult times. Is it difficult today? I think it is. We've not seen this divisiveness and polarization politically, not just in our country, but around the world, right? It's not just in the U.S., it's everywhere. We have fewer democratic countries in the world today than we had when the Berlin Wall fell down, right? We have more despots and dictators and hard leaders than we've had in a very long time. And we've got upheaval and disruption going on in most societies of the world. And so it's a difficult and challenging time for people all over the world. And so I think we have to ask ourselves sort of what's best for humanity. We have one of our companies is in Houston, Texas, and I'm partners with a really great human being, Steve Satterwhite. And we've sat down and thought about his purpose in life, which is to elevate people, my purpose to improve the human condition. How do we do that with the company that we have? And we've decided not to sell the company, not to bring in private equity, and it's growing very rapidly, but to harvest the company for the good of other people. So we're taking all the profits minus CapEx that we have to invest to keep the company going, right? But we take all the profits of the company and we invest in marginalized people and marginalized community with the overriding drive to end hunger. And because if we don't end hunger, then we can't get people educated. We can't get them jobs. We can't do anything, really. Hunger is sort of the square one. We've got to do something about that. And so we've decided to do that. Not unlike Colombia, I think it was, or maybe Patagonia. It was Patagonia. Put the whole company in a trust, and they're going to use it for the benefit of other things, right? And I think we need more corporations willing to do that kind of thing. In Minneapolis, for example, it's very prominent that the major corporations give up 5% for the good of the community every year, right? They give 5%. So there are different ways of attacking it, but we need good leaders who see beyond, have an expanse and a mind beyond the immediate, to see how can we, in fact, use these tools, companies, to benefit mankind. How can we use them to benefit others? It can be small or it can be large, our commitment. But I think we all have to face that notion that we have to do more. What's right for the greatest number of people.
I love that, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate that a lot. Seriously. All right. We're on to the greatness question, and then we'll get the show wrapped up. But before we get to the greatness question, if some people want to learn more about, your work, they want to get the book, want to follow you, what's the best way for them to learn more about you and the amazingness that you're producing in the world?
Well, there's a Warren Rustand website, and you can go to that website and learn more about kind of what we do and what we're about. So that's as simple as it gets, probably.
All right. So we'll make sure we put that in the show notes. And without further ado, the greatness question. So, Warren, what is the number one barrier to creating greatness that you've overcome in your life, and how did you overcome it?
So I am the barrier. We are the barrier to greatness. Through our own inadequacies, our own failures, our own self-limiting beliefs, I think that we get in our own way. All of us have the potential to be great, again, based on our potential, right? We talked about that earlier in the show. Based on what we have, we're all capable of being great in our own sphere and in our own self. But we get in our own way. We get distracted easily, particularly entrepreneurs get distracted easily. It's the next book, it's the next speaker, it's the next idea, it's the next shiny object. We talk about that a lot within the entrepreneurial world. And so I think it's us and a part of the human condition. So I think we all have great potential. I think we can all do something great. And maybe it's just being the greatest little league coach that anybody's ever seen in that community. Maybe it's being the best janitor. Maybe it's being the best secretary. Maybe we're just off the charts good at what we do with our potential. And that's really all that matters. Because if we had a world where all of us were living to our own potential, it would be a pretty good world. It'd be a pretty good world. And so I hope that all of us will think about step back, get clarity of vision about who we are, what our capabilities, skills, and abilities and capacities are, and then apply the best of those to everything we do. And I believe when we do that, we will get there. I think there's one other thing. I think ego is a stopper. I think all of us at different times, I can tell you I get inflated with myself. I get to thinking I'm pretty cool. I get to thinking I'm the best basketball player in the world or the best politician or the best corporate leader. And when we do that, we automatically build barriers with other people and with our own ability to do what we set out to do. We have to be very careful with our egos, and we have to subordinate those egos to the degree that we can. We have to push them down. And I think if I had one attractive quality that I could say would draw me to a leader, it would be humility. It would be humility. Somebody who has perspective on who they are and what their place in the world is. And I think, so I would say that is also a barrier. First, ourselves, and secondly, the ego that we carry, because we all carry an ego, the ego that we carry and how we manage it. So I think that would be my response, Darius.
I love it, man. Warren, so much gratitude from here at the Greatness Machine having you on the show. Really appreciate this so much. Thank you so much for your time today.
Well, Darius, you're doing a fantastic work. As I said earlier, couldn't be happier with your own success and in your new venture. Have a great time.
Thank you so much. Guys, listen, share this. Leaders need to hear this. Thank you so much, Warren. Peace out, everybody. We love you.
You are listening to The Greatness Machine, and that's a wrap for today. Listen,
if you love what you heard, subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform that you're tuning in on, so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. We have tons of great people coming on, and we're stoked to have you here to enjoy it with us. Leave us a review. Tell us what you love most about this particular episode. We love getting the reviews. We love to see what you guys love most. And if this particular episode, made you think of someone who's leveling up in their business and in their life, print screen, share it with them. Leaders are the best givers. And after all, we're all here to support and grow with each other. And in case you want to see some of the fun behind the scenes shots or some of the things that we're doing, I'm actually writing about this in my weekly newsletter. Go to www.therealdarius.com and subscribe to my newsletter. We're talking about fun things like business and life and mindfulness and cryptocurrencies and gosh, I don't even know, everything and anything, but it's tons of fun stuff I write about. I try to get it out on a weekly basis. You can subscribe at www.therealdarius.com. And with that said, look, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. I love you. Peace. We're out of here. See you guys on the next one.
She's my lover.